All right, everybody. We are going to be talking about graminoids today, which I must admit, of all the groups of plants we're going to talk about, these are the hardest for me. I'm not very good at them. I'm trying to work on my patience to actually key them out and not just kind of learn how they look as a whole, but actually understand the characters that can tell them apart. So don't be like me. Go ahead and learn them properly and the features that define them, particularly if you're interested in restoration ecology, wetlands, wildlife. These groups of plants are critical, essentially, if you're going to be doing any kind of ecological work. There are often very specific training courses or books that just focus on graminoids. So I did a little looking online. I found one here through this wetlandtraining.com. Various state schools often offer them, including online, like the one here. Colorado Native Plant Society hosts some lectures about them. I'm linking to one online. And then there's a really great book done by a botanist at the Denver Botanical Gardens that just focuses on grasses. So you can often find, tools just specifically to this. And to various regions of the world as well. Okay. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna make sure this is actually recording. I'm paranoid that I'm not actually recording. And that would be a disaster for me to do this for hours and then realize I never recorded it. What's going on? Oh my God. Okay. I think I am recording. Yay. Sorry, everybody. Okay. All right. So let's situate ourselves where the graminoids are found. So they are in the order Poales, monocots. And there's an interesting trend in the evolution of the monocots, going from big showy flowers, an obvious perianth, sepals, petals, showy things like the bromeliads here that are insect or bird pollinated. And over time, a reduction in the flower size, a reduction in the perianth, moving away certainly from avian pollination and starting to focus on wind pollination. So jettisoning the perianth, sometimes having unisexual flowers to promote outcrossing is critical once you have wind as the sole means of pollination. We're again going to see our friend the bracts taking on very important roles in the structure, both again protecting the sexual organs, the developing fruits, etc., helping with dispersal, etc., etc. So the flowers are going to get tinier. We're going to eventually call them florets, and they are going to be arranged in spikelets. Okay, so the three big families to learn are the Juncaceae, the rushes, the Cyperaceae, which are the sedges, and the Poaceae, which are the grasses. Now, in terms of like worldwide species richness, ecosystem services, carbon sequestration, food for critters, whatever, Cyperaceae and Poaceae are far more important than the Juncaceae. In fact, Poaceae itself is one of the, probably top 3 or 4 largest families in the world. Cyperaceae is very species rich, particularly the genus Carex we're going to talk about. Okay, so here's a handy table for how to tell them apart. And if you really want to get good with these, you have to be able to do this sort of work as far as you can, just with the vegetative form, as well as when in fruit or flower. So focusing first on the vegetative aspects, thinking about the leaves. So the rushes actually have round or highly rolled up leaves. So you can kind of pinch them with your thumbnail and look in cross section. If they're round, it's going to be a rush. Sedges and grasses have flat leaves. Sedges, sometimes they're kind of accordion into a W in cross section. Some sedges actually lack leaves. They just have a stalk at the base of the inflorescence, like Eleochris and Chenoplectus. Grasses have a much generally ability to grow tall and actually have nodes and kind of grow up. Think of a bamboo. I mean, they are the quintessential giant grass. If you can imagine a bamboo in your head, you might imagine kind of those bumps up the stem, right? So they have very clear nodes. Grasses, the leaves are going to come off two ranked, so kind of 180 degrees apart. Sedges, in contrast, are going to have three ranked leaves, usually because in cross section they are triangular. Okay, so like every side of that triangle is going to have a leaf coming off of it, as opposed to the round grasses, which are going to be two ranked. For the most part, grasses have hollow stems. Again, think of bamboo, though the nodes themselves are solid. If you were to cut right through there, you would see they're solid. Okay. Now the leaves are going to be in two different sections. The leaf sheath, which is at the base, kind of wrapping around the stem. And then it is going to no longer be wrapping, it will be a blade, okay? So definitely want to look at that in lab a lot and in the field. So the sheath versus the blade, right at the juncture of the two, in some groups, like the Cyperaceae and the Poaceae, you're going to find a flap of tissue called the ligule. And its shape, its appearance, whatever, is going to be really critical in keying out sedges and grasses. The Juncaceae lack that. Okay, now focusing back on the sheath, the lowermost portion, the two sides of it can be open like a vest, albeit with the margins kind of overlapping, so you can't really see the stem underneath it. That's what you see in the rushes and the grasses. Whereas in the sedges, it is fused all the way around like a turtleneck. Okay, so that's usually a good way to vegetatively tell the sedges apart from the grasses or the rushes. Now focusing on the reproductive structure, we are going to have highly reduced down flowers. The rushes, however, they're still going to look very much like a little lily, like an angiosperm kind of traditional flower. So rushes have both male and female parts, so they're bisexual or perfect. They are three-merous and they look like a little lily. And you can often see that even when they're in fruit. In contrast, sedges and grasses flowers are going to not at all look showy or pretty or lily-like at all, okay? Sedges and grasses are going to have bracts or floral scales subtending each floret or tiny flower, okay? Very critically, one is going to subtend each floret in the sedges, and there will be two with very important names, the palea and the lemma, we'll go over this, surrounding each flower in the grasses, okay? Another way to tell them apart is in fruit. Juncaceae is going to have a capsular fruit, so again, very much like a lily, whereas with sedges and grasses, it's a much more hard structure. So an achene, technically in the sedge, versus a grain or a caryopsis. Those look very similar, kind of without real clear anatomical look on it. Okay, so we will practice those together. Okay, so now let's deep dive and take a look at the Juncaceae, or the rushes. There's two major genera in this group, Juncus, which has open leaf sheaths, and Lugula, which has fused leaf sheaths, like a Cyperaceae. So these can be, for me, pretty darn tricky to tell apart vegetatively, especially from Cyperaceae. They have three ranked leaves, like a Cyperaceae, but they have these round, solid stems, so not as triangular. If you're looking at a wetland, like we see on the left here, you often see big mounds above, maybe kind of standing water, something like that. That's called a tussock. So there's lots of really important things happening down in a tussock. You might be the roots of the rushes or other wetland plants might be holding in soil, nutrients, et cetera, et cetera. So rushes are often very critical in forming these tussocks in wetlands. The inflorescence is often like there's lots of little flowers and they're very congested or a tight little inflorescence. Sometimes they're kind of at the top or they can appear lateral. So looking over here, here's an inflorescence, and then look how there's this long bract, which looks like a leaf. So it kind of looks like if you're following this axis here, like it's slit open on the side and out bursts a little inflorescence. So sometimes rushes look that way. Here's what I mean about it's like a little lily flower, right? So we definitely see some tepals, and they are brown. There's 6 stamen, a superior 3 carpellate ovary. Again, just very much like a tiny little lily, albeit very small and wind pollinated. Here's just showing some of the diversity that we get in the genus Juncus. Arcticus is a very wide distributed species. Here it is with these like stems vertically traveling along sand, I believe here, and kind of spreading out, bunching out, etc. Some are kind of weedy, path rush, common rush. These are things you will find in like highly tread areas that are kind of wet, whereas some really require high quality wetlands. Okay, moving on to Cyperaceae. So about 4,500 species worldwide. In general, another way to kind of tell the difference between rushes and sedges versus grasses. Rushes and sedges usually require a much more moist habitat than some grasses. There are exceptions to both of those things, right? But in general, you are not going to see Cyperaceae really living in arid environments or grasslands in which the soil kind of dries out. Similarly, not that many grasses are able to withstand the sheer moisture amount of soils in wetlands. Again, there's exceptions to that, but in general, this is kind of the queen of the wetlands. Poaceae is the queen of the drylands. And again, within Cyperaceae, the largest genus is Carex. It is, I believe, the largest genus in Colorado. There's over 119 species in our state here. Okay, the majority of Cyperaceae, unfortunately not all, but most of them have triangular stems in cross section. So, which you might have learned, sedges have edges. That is true. You're not going to find a grass with edges or a rush with edges. However, you might find a sedge that lacks edges. Yay. Okay, but it's really nice when you can find that triangle and feel it with your hands. Okay, let's look at some of the genera. Here's Cyperus. I'm pretty sure that is what, or closely related to what papyrus, one of the original papers from Egypt, is used with. These have bisexual flowers. So we have, both the pistil here and the 3 stamen, 2 fused carpels. We have 2 little stigma here and a single bract subtending each floret. The florets are arranged in these spikelets, and they're kind of 2 ranked. They look kind of like a little wheat sheath here. And then kind of arranged in a big umbel like this. So sometimes I can just know what Cyperus looks like. Okay, here's some tricky ones. Scirpus and Schienoplectus. These are the bulrushes. These often have roundish stems. So again, they're in the Cyperaceae, but not triangular. Similarly, bisexual flowers, 3 stamen. Now we have 3 fused carpels. These actually retain the perianth bristles. So they're not pretty little lilies, but you can find 6 little hairs that are perianth in origin. And again, subtended by a single bract, again, contrasting that with the Poaceae. Unlike Cyperus that we just saw, this group has florets arranged in a spikelet in a whorl. So it creates these very round structures as opposed to like a 2-ranked kind of feather look to them. Showing some of the diversity in this group of wetland specialists. And then, of course, we come to Carex. Large, complex, beautiful, important. I think very difficult to key out, but worth getting to know, again, if that's an area you want to work in. Okay, so unlike some of the others that we saw, these are unisexual and usually monoecious, right? So we have an individual with male-only florets and female-only florets. Males are usually higher up to catch more of the breeze, and the female florets are lower, right? So you can see lots of individual florets that are female, lots of individual florets that are male above it, spatially segregated. Okay, so the key feature to telling carex, there is a single floral bract. That's not the interesting thing. What really is the key to carex is a second bract that is surrounding the the um, the female floret like a garbage bag. It's called the perigynium. Okay, so here we go. Here's a female floret here, right? So we have the ovary, etc. Now it's in fruit as an achene. Here it is too. And there's this sac all the way around it called the perigynium. Here's bladder sedge, in which it's very obvious and big. So we have, this one normal bract down here. You can see one poking here. And then a big inflated one all around. Oh, and my dog is going to start barking. Delightful. No, we don't need that. We don't need that at all. Okay, so you'll want to always be checking for the perigynium. Most of the other genera of Cyperaceae lack a perigynium, and Poaceae doesn't have that, so that's a good thing to learn. Okay, just a few other genera. The cotton grasses, Erioforum, these are often common in upper montane, kind of wetlands, subalpine, really cottony, nice look to them, lots of hairs. Eliocharis, or the spike rushes, these are really lacking leaves. It's just kind of a stalk with a spikelet on the top of it. This group I always get confused with all kinds of things. This one is very tricky for me. Okay, finally, no big deal, the grasses. And, credit where credit is due. This is economically, maybe you could even argue ecologically, the most important plant family in the whole wide world. And also keep in mind, the grasses are starting to become the big winner of climate change, particularly as, unfortunately, a lot of forests are burning down, tropical forest, western coniferous forests, et cetera, et cetera. They're not necessarily currently or under, various scenarios of climate change going to be replaced by more forests, certainly not in our lifetime. What they're being replaced by are grasslands. So Poaceae is definitely worth learning and appreciating for all that it is and all that it does. Okay, so again, looking at, this is a phylogeny of Poales, so kind of sister to everything else, is Typha, which is actually the cattails, and Sparganium, which is another wetland plant. My beloved bromeliads, showy and pretty. And then here's this clade over here. There's Juncaceae and Cyperaceae. They're sister to each other. And then here's a whole bunch of other of their relatives. So all I really want to show you is that Poaceae is not that close of a relative of Juncaceae and Cyperaceae. It has a lot of other much closer relatives. These are very small families in general, usually in the tropics. They tend to be a little more typical monocot, albeit with reduced flowers, but they're not as, so I guess you could argue that there's kind of two separate origins of these highly reduced florets. Once maybe here in the Cyperaceae, Juncaceae, and a second time down here in the Poaceae, albeit this whole broader clade was kind of on that trajectory as a whole. As far as we know, the plant family Poaceae originated in South America. So here's like a mini phylogeny of Poaceae, and these are all subfamilies globally. And the one that is the most distantly related to everything else is endemic to South America. And then you see kind of stepwise down, moving out of South America across the tropics. Here's a small subfamily just found in sub-Saharan Africa. And then the big monster clade here. So the vast majority of grasses are in this big clade here. There's two little acronyms for the two subclades in it. Those are now global. And by global, I mean global. There is not a single landmass anywhere on the planet where you can't find the Poaceae. Greenland, Iceland, the tip of Antarctica, every tropical island, every latitude, every elevation, they're there. They're competing with woody plants. Some have become adapted to shade, and a lot are kind of ecosystem engineers with flammability, things like that, adaptations to grazing, etc., that we'll talk a little bit about, promoting their own expansion. So an incredibly successful plant group. Also home to, our most economically important things: corn, wheat, rice, barley, millet, sugar. All of these things are in the Poaceae. Just to show you that molecular stuff can be cool, there's a really rich area of study right now looking at the history of whole genome duplications in lots of living things, especially land plants, who are very good at accruing whole genome duplication events. And as far as we know now, there are probably multiple ancient whole genome duplications within Poaceae. And putting more of a fine point on it, the origin of that massive clade that has the majority of them, there's probably was a whole genome duplication that everything over here shares. Those early diverging grasses don't have it. They're also very species poor. So here's just kind of looking at the number of genera within these subfamilies and number of species. And you see they're kind of tiny, and then there's a huge explosion in this clade, which coincides with this likely whole genome duplication event. So various biologists get really excited studying what do all these grasses do with all the extra copies of the genes. Once you've doubled your whole genome, what novel functions can arise in everything else? So grasses are an absolutely amazing study system to study all kinds of things. And there's so much that's known because it contains so many economically important plants, including a lot of, biofuels, switchgrass, things like that too. That's work is going on. So something for everyone in the Poaceae. Okay. So again, let's take a look at the vegetative features. Okay. So again, we have a lot more, elongation of the stem with clear nodes, particularly in mature tall grasses. It can be hard with shorter grasses to find a node. So find like a big tall grass to look at when you're trying to find these things. So they're jointed with nodes. The node itself can be solid right through there, but then the stem itself is hollow and circular, not triangular, right? Now we're looking at the sheath, and then it breaks away into being the blade. Now, sometimes the blade comes off like at a really extreme 90-degree angle. Sometimes it really stays oppressed. But a true leaf has both a sheath and a blade region in the Poaceae, right? And then right at that juncture is this thing called the ligule. And how that ligule looks is often very important for keying out. Again, the leaves are going to be coming off of two sides or spiraling, never three-ranked. We talked about that. And now we'll talk about intercalary meristems. Okay, so you might remember how we talked about nodes and internodes, right? A node is where the leaf comes out. That's still true here.
And we've talked about axillary meristems, which in most plants are like a discrete mound of meristematic cells. However, grasses have this amazing thing called an intercalary meristem. So here's another view of some grasses here, and there's kind of elongation happening between the nodes, right? But this reddish here is all meristematic. So it's, as opposed to being in a discrete little hump or a little bud, it's all the way around. And, you know, depending on how the grass is built, particularly bunch grass, mat forming grasses, and grasslands, right? Those intercalary meristems are often very, very low to the ground. What this is an adaptation for is grazing and fire. So grasses are adapted to having periodically tons of their biomass removed via grazing or lawn mowers or whatever. And as long as there's just some of that intercalary meristem present, it didn't clip it all the way down, it will regenerate. And it's actually very good for the grass, right? So you think of all those really important coevolution stories with mammals in particular, and the origin of grasses promoting speciation in mammals, particularly in grass dominated ecosystems. So this is like what was kind of the Serengeti of North America, with all of these different ungulates, and then thinking of all the adaptations of those animals' teeth to withstanding eating grass all the time, right? So grasses also accrue silica from the sand or the soil into their stems. They build it into their body, which wears down the teeth of the animals, right? So if you know anything about horses or cattle or bison, thinking about how their teeth are like regenerated as they're kind of constantly grated away by all of this stuff. Certainly our different ungulate animals consume grass in a different way. Bison are far gentler grazers than things like cattle, right? And so promoting more regeneration of native grasses. Similarly with fire, like low intensity frequent fire that removes most of the biomass but retains the intercalary meristem is good for grasses, promotes grasses, and allows grasses to outcompete things that cannot tolerate fire, like woody plants, right? And then, of course, there's been really interesting studies on the evolution of C4 photosynthesis, which hopefully you remember something about from biology of plants. And as you may recall, right, this is an adaptation to dealing with aridity. So grasses are really adapted to fire and arid ecosystems. Okay, so now deep dive into grass morphology, right? So if you're going to learn about grasses, you have to learn about spikelets and florets. So florets are going to be arranged in a spikelet. Spikelet is a larger unit than floret. Okay, so taking a look at kind of like some line drawings here. Here's like an oat. We'll focus over here, right? You see that there's two big bracts here, and then there's some smaller subunits inside of that, okay? This whole unit here would be the spikelet. It has at the base glooms, okay? And the entire oat itself is composed of multiple spikelets. So we're only looking at one little unit of this now, which is always kind of confusing to me. Okay, so spikelet is defined by having glooms at the base. Inside of the glooms, then, there's going to be one or more florets, okay? So we're going to talk about a floret, right? But florets are tiny flowers with two very specific bracts, the lemma and the palea. Okay, so the whole thing's a spikelet. There's the glooms. And there's lots of florets inside. So in both of these two examples, there's multiple florets per spikelet. You might see some grasses in which there is a single floret per spikelet. And that's often a very important trait for keying things out. Okay, now focusing on the floret. Each floret is surrounded by two bracts with very specific names. The lemma, which is the outermost, and it often has a very specific appendage at the tip called an awn. Okay, we be looking a lot at awns. These are often adaptations for fruit dispersal. Okay, so the lemma, which may or may not have an awn, and then to the interior is the palea, which is smaller, awnless, and often not really seen. Okay, so there's the lemma, which is bigger, and then there's the palea to the interior. Okay, so what is a flower? I'm so confused. Everything we've been talking about, glooms, lemmas, paleas, those are all bracts. We have not even said the word sepal. We have not even said the word petal. Where are they? Okay, so now we're going to look at more the traditional floral parts. Okay. So, oh, thank goodness. Here are some stamen. There's 3 of them here. Okay, that makes sense to me. Okay, yep, we have like probably an ovary, 2 feathery stigma. Okay. And then these weird things. I think this looks like the golden snitch from Harry Potter, kind of, the actual flower of the grass here. Okay. So these sepals and the petals, as near as we can tell, and there's like a lot of active debate about this, are reduced down to basically nothing, or these little things called loticules, which are right at the base of the ovary. So they have absolutely no function whatsoever in any visual display for a pollinator. These are wind pollinated. What they do is they puff up and push out the bracts that are wrapped around this whole thing, exposing the stigma and exposing the anthers at anthesis. So it's always kind of a treat, even though it makes my allergies go crazy, to see a grass in actual flower where you can see the little feathery stigmas and the anthers sticking out. Okay. Grasses in general are going to have 3 stamen per flower or floret, same difference here. Gynoecium is superior, 2 fused carpels. And then the fruit type of grass is a grain, also known as a caryopsis. So there is 1 ovule per fruit, and the carpel is completely fused to the seed. So if you think of like a corn kernel, if you've ever like cut or eaten one or whatever, that outermost wall is completely oppressed to everything on the interior. You cannot peel off. It's not like a sunflower seed where you can remove the outer. They are completely pressed through. A wheat, germ, rice grain, all that kind of stuff. There's no peeling, nothing really to remove. Okay, so yep, again, the loticules, as far as we know, are homologous to the petals or the sepals. Okay, now we're going to end it just looking at some of the different genera and species of grasses here. Gosh, there's so many. I was trying to prioritize ones that we see particularly in El Paso County, both high quality native ones as well as some kind of non-native ones that are really, really common. As you might expect, there are absolutely noxious weeds that are grasses, as well as many that are just absolutely critical for ecosystems. Okay. So before you begin, just some things to think about when you encounter a grass in the field, just in general. Here's kind of the once over I want you to start to give the grass. First of all, identify the ligule, right? Again, where the blade and the sheath kind of go their separate ways. Look at the ligule and look at the variation in ligules. Notice for hairs, colors. Sometimes there's very specific venation, prominent venation of the blade that can be diagnostic. It's very impressive to me when I see botanists who can ID grasses completely vegetatively. They're going to use those features exclusively for that. Okay, I'm not that good, but some people are. And that makes you a very useful biologist. Okay, then the inflorescence, right? So broadly speaking, can you classify it into a panicle, which again would have kind of a branching structure. So these spikelets are arranged in a branching panicle. Or is it a raceme with no branching, but again, like a base stalk or a pedicel beneath each? Or is it a spike? So over here, we're actually seeing a spike. Each one of these units is a spikelet. There's basically no pedicel whatsoever. It's just attached to the main axis. So you can see two very different inflorescence forms here. Okay, then you could be talking about spikelet orientation. So in this crested wheatgrass, the spikelets are kind of two ranked. We'll see other things like Timothy grass where they're all the way around. Then, Lord help you, you have to start to dissect down a single spikelet. So imagine yourself peeling off one of these units, and this is when like hand lens dissecting scope becomes very important. How many florets are per spikelet? Basically, the important thing is it one or is it more than one? Ugh, I hate doing that, but you don't hate it yet. Try it out. And then the final thing to look for are awns. So remember, there's the palea and the lemma, which are the two bracts of each floret. Sometimes the lemma has an appendage called an awn. So you can kind of see these long hairs coming out here. Those are going to be awns. I'm not really, there's kind of like a little awn happening here. We're going to see some very extreme awns here in a moment. Okay. All right, here's Achnathorum hymenoides, or the rice grass, like a high quality arid adapted grass of our region with a nice paniculate inflorescence. It would have a very dark black caryopsis, which has kind of like hairs inside of that. So nothing else really is like that. And the pedicel is kind of curly like this. So this is one that you can kind of just learn. Okay, here's crested wheatgrass, Agropyrum cristatum, a non-native plant. We see in a lot of wheat ears, very much like a little feather here, again, like a spike arrangement of all the different spikelets. And these are just alphabetized, so that's probably not the best way to learn them, but I just threw them on here. Okay, Andropogon gerardii, or big blue stem. This is about going to be the tallest grass that we have here. There are important remnants of what was once much more contiguous tall grass prairie into Colorado, and there's little pockets of this left that we can find. This species is incredibly common further out east. And if given enough moisture, it could probably be, 8 feet tall. It often has kind of these really dense spikelets arranged in like 3 or 4 main lines. It's often called turkey foot because it has like the look of like a 3-toed turkey stepping down on beautiful, beautiful leaves, very colorful, especially heading into fall. Okay, here's purple threon aristida purpurea. So you see all these lines coming off of these. So let's follow this one. 1, 2, 3. So the single lemma of a single floret has 3 awns. Nothing else really is going to have that. That's a common grass of our area. Kind of much shorter than Andropogon, but still a pretty tall grass. Okay, here's 3 other high quality native grasses. Buffalo grass, Buchloe dactyloides, sometimes placed in Bouteloua, is the shortest of all of these. Very tiny little inflorescences of multiple spikelets. This is a great replacement in our region for like a Kentucky bluegrass lawn. This is an air-adapted mat forming grass that you can use to replace lawn. And then our 2 species of Bouteloua, which are really important right where we live, Curtipendula, where all of the spikelets kind of fall to one side. And this is a nice shot showing full flower. Okay, so you see these little feathery things. Those are the stigma, pressing out through all of the 2 glooms at the base, and then the palea and the lemma. and then the 3 big fat stamen perfluorette hanging out here. Bouteloua gracilis, blue grama. They also look like eyelashes or eyebrows, much more of a spike inflorescence with the spikelets kind of 2 ranked arranged on one side. Pretty easy one to learn in our area. Okay, genus Bromus. 2 non-native species here, Bromus inermis, the smooth brome, which I have all over in my property. Woo! Oh no. What did I just do? Oh, I see what happened. Okay.
I wanted to show you a video about Bromus tectorum here, or inermis. Okay, hold on. Let's see. What am I doing? Oh, right. Okay. So let's look at this video real quick about cheatgrass, if the website will load. Come on. All right. Sorry, this is kind of a hot mess of a day of me. Okay. All right. So this is, I think this is Audubon Society. Yes. And they did this nice like 4-minute video showing just how disruptive cheatgrass is to the American West and to so many different people here.
I mean, to say it aggressively, like we're on war against cheatgrass.
That invasive plant is invading in on our traditional foods and medicines. It's kind of like when you get mold growing in your refrigerator. That mold is going to start affecting your other foods.
Keeping this landscape healthy, it's good for wildlife, it's good for hunters, and it's really important for that local community economic function.
On our ranch here, it's, July, August, and even the first part of September are extremely stressful because you're always looking for fires. You're always worried about fires. You're worried about, not if they come, but how big and how many. Right now, we pray a lot.
Once cheatgrass takes hold on an area after a fire, you are much more likely to have a fire return maybe every, multiple times within 10 years. And so that could be hugely damaging to the ranch. It could put us out of business.
You look west-wide, the amount of fires, and even the last couple of years, the amount of fires and the amount of acres that are burned, it's absolutely getting worse across the entire West.
So when a fire does happen, often the land managers know that those wildlife are going to be stressed, there's going to be fewer of them. So they decrease the tags that are available to hunters in that specific area. Economic impacts of fire can be huge. There are a lot of people that make their bread and butter off of the hunting industry. When you have those fires, when the hunting quality is degraded, when hunters, will go elsewhere to hunt, that economic stimulus is not coming to these areas. When I'm out looking at this landscape, I see, my past, my present, and my future. I see the landscape, the sagebrush I was raised in, and kind of the love I have for this plant that feeds these critters that then I'm presently hunting and bringing home. But it's also, this landscape is a place that I really believe in protecting and conserving and keeping healthy so that into the future, I can continue to harvest my food from this landscape and hopefully inspire others to love this place as well and continue the hunting heritage.
The Shoshone people have relied on our wildlife species for food as far back as anybody can remember. The wealth of our communities was in the biodiversity of the wildlife and plants. It's about feeding our families. It's about being able to have that connection to those animals that our grandmas and grandpas did. Out here you may not know it, but this is an important place for our grocery store and our pharmacy. Animals depend on this sagebrush grassland ecosystem here. It's high elevation desert, but still very important habitat for a lot of our wildlife species. And so it's it's hard to see invasive plants and things come in. The people, the Shoshone and Arapaho tribes, have a lot of stake for the future of our people here, for our young ones that are growing up here. Really, it's my hope also that we're able to maintain our cultural lifeways, to be able to come out and hunt pronghorn, or come out and harvest foods and medicines out here in the sagebrush. I hope that many generations are able to do that in perpetuity.
All right. So yeah, you can see, just what's at stake for many people regionally, especially related to Bromus tinctorum, or the cheatgrass, which is a plant I truly hate. I really, really do. But it will be very important we learn how to identify that one. Okay. Alemus canadensis, or wild rye, has this very kind of curled back awns when it's mature. That's another important thing, is you're going to see a lot of plants that vary in the way that the awns look once the fruits are mature and once the whole inflorescence has dried down. A big one that is important for is Heterostypha comata, or the needle and thread grass, which is a very kind of high quality native grass with about the longest awns you could ever imagine. And the cool thing is, when those fruits are mature and once they come off the plant, the awns often they dry down and form this curlicue. And just like Cercocarpus montanus, that curlicue look is going to act as a drill when the seed touches the soil, and it's going to drill it into the ground using the wind to do that. Hortium Jubatum, or squirrel tail, is a non-native grass, very pretty, but it's a very low quality, often kind of noxious plant for wildlife and domesticated animals to eat. Okay. Not at all like that. A high quality plant, Mount Muley, Muhlenbergia montana. This is more kind of a higher elevation, like upper montane, upper foothills plant. Very tiny, fine little spikelets there. Pascopyrum smithii, western wheatgrass. There's several species of wheatgrass. They have these beautiful little spikelets. They look like tiny little braids kind of coming off. Sort of two-ranked here. It's quite nice. Phalaris arundinaceae, or the reed canary grass. This is much more of a wetland grass, very tall. I am unclear of what's going on with it in Colorado. When I used to teach out east, this was like a major invasive species, huge problem in wetlands. But Ackerfeld's book didn't make it seem like it was doing that out here. So I'm kind of unclear about invasive grasses of Colorado. Maybe one of you can look more into that. Phleum pretense, or Timothy. This is one of many of these kind of like orchard grasses. A lot of non-native grasses, of course, came over from Eurasia with various settlers. Many of these seeds were in kind of animal fodder, and they would replace, native grassland with grasses that they brought with them, fodder for cattle. So Phleum pretense is one of those. I think it looks like a tiny little cattail plant. It's a pretty easy one. Definitely kind of a 3D inflorescence. Kentucky bluegrass, Poa pretense. That's what a lot of our lawns are, even in Colorado, whether they should be or not. And here's what one looks like when it's actually gone to flower. Quite a few species in the genus Poa. Schizachyrium scoparium, high quality native, little blue stem, very, very fuzzy, hairy little florets. And it turns this beautiful orangey red, particularly in the fall and in the winter. And Sporobolus aeroides, or the drop seed, another arid adapted
very tiny, tiny, tiny little florets with nice fat caryopses that fall out of that. And with that, that is the end of our graminoid lecture. Hooray.